Today we are going over Fury. Going to do a bit of a Fury guide for 9.1. Obviously, I'm not a Fury expert. I think I hit like 2650 in Season 1 BFA playing Fury. Played Fury a fair bit off and on, but never I would never say I'd know as much as I do about arms as I do on Fury. But I think that's kind of the same with every PvP warrior because Fury is never that popular. So a few things to cover off is that there's still a lot of things changing right now in 9.1. So some of the information here might not be 100% relevant to what you're on. In the video, we're going to cover Covenants, we're going to cover spec, we're going to watch some video and sort of compare how it feels compared to arms, at least in duels. And then sort of talk about best legendaries, all that kind of stuff. But beforehand, let's talk about what the Fury kit is. Essentially, you have Bloodthirst, which is the ability you spam pretty much on cooldown, and it does about 3k damage, gives you 8 rage, and gives you 3% of your health. Pretty good. That's sort of balancing a Fury. You don't have defensive stance, but the idea is you heal a lot. Obviously, in PvP, what happens is there's dampening, there's Mortal Strike effects, so this 3% is very rarely actually 3%, except for maybe the start of Arena if you don't have MS. You have Titan script, so you can have two-handed weapons, which means you get double the enchants, right? And you can swap this to one-handed for the single-minded Fury, but you get a lot of stam, you get a lot of extra secondaries, and you get a lot of strength. So pretty considerable buff to your overall stats. As you can see, this is still all 9.0 gear, and I've got 34% verse, I've got 90% mastery, 8% speed, 13% haste. Really good to buff your overall stats. Your main defensive is Enrage Regen, which gives you a 30% damage shield, which you can use when you're stunned, and it restores your Bloodthirst, which normally does 3%, restores 20% extra, so 23%. Which is really substantial if you don't have MS and no dampening, and even if there's dampening in MS, usually you'll top yourself via Enrage Regen. It lasts 8 seconds, so you usually get 2 Bloodthirsts at least. So about 40% of your health and the shield. Enrage is like the main mechanic. So when you get enraged, you do more damage, you have more haste, and you have more movement speed, and Bloodthirst always has a 45% chance to enrage you. And with Fresh Meat, that's increased to 60%. When you're pressing it, and then the first Bloodthirst you always do when you hit a new target is going to always enrage you, so you have enrage at the start. The other things to look at is Recklessness, and Rampage. So Rampage is your rage dumper, and you do 4 brutal strikes for a total of 5.5k damage, and these can crit. They're 4 individual strikes, so it's pretty good. And then Recklessness, which is sort of like Avatar, which gives you rage, increases your rage generation. And then if you're running Reckless Abandon, I don't know why I keep saying it wrong, Reckless Abandon, you generate the 50 rage, and you get the Bloodthirst and Raging Blow extra effects. So let's talk about PvP talents and PvP talents. So I think, in my opinion, I really like generally Fresh Meat. I think having Enrage up consistently makes you do a lot more damage, and it's usually always good to have. Sudden Death, I guess, could be okay. I don't really know if it's worth it because it feels like I never have to worry about the cooldown of Condemn anyway. And usable on any target, there's always a button to press, you press Condemn sometimes, but not a huge deal. It does not feel the same as it does when you're on arms. And War Machine, I don't really know. I just don't feel like this is that good. 20% more rage. You only get 3 or 4 rage when you auto attack. We can test that now. So when you auto attack, you get 6 rage and then 3 rage for your offhand. So that would be about 6 times 1.2, which is something along the lines of 7 rage. And then on the 3 hit, you're only getting 3.6 rage instead of 3. Something along those lines. Not really worth it in my opinion. On this row here, we still take Stormbolt. Oh, and the reason why Thresh Meat is always good is that when you open on a target, you get that enrage straight away, which is pretty big because then you can kind of continue to get that as you hit Raging Blow. And then if you look at, we'll talk about PvP talents, Battle Trance, Enduring Rage, all this kind of stuff, which synchronize really nicely with Fresh Meat. But we'll cover that in a sec. I've picked Massacre on this. I don't really know if it's that good. I think Frenzy actually might be better, or even Onslaught. In my opinion, I've just picked Massacre because I didn't know what else to pick. Frenzy gives you a lot more haste, if you see here, um, which you can see here, and then the more you press it, the button, it kind of stacks up. So if you're tunneling one target, Frenzy is going to be really good, and you can see it lasts quite a while. So realistically, if you're swapping targets anyway, the Frenzy debuff is going to drop. Um, and you just have to kind of make sure that you're rampaging a single target. I think this is quite strong. I don't really have any issues with Massacre at like lower health. I actually prefer having more haste and just more stats, especially since that stacks with your enrage really nicely. And you can sort of keep this up pretty easily, like way easier than you can keep your MS up, and that kind of makes your haste really, really high, which means that you can press your buttons. They feel great. It's easy to keep this up. So Frenzy's pretty good. I think Onslaught could be pretty good too. 5k damage straight away. And you have to be enraged. But, you know, if we look at it here, we proc that up. We get the enrage, hopefully, in a second. Yeah, there's the enrage. And I moused over it. But Onslaught did 4k physical. So not bad. It also generates rage for you as well, which is a really important mechanic when we talk about how sort of Fury is played, in my opinion, best in PvP in the future. The rest of the stuff, War Paint, pretty straightforward. Cruelty, I think Cruelty is the best. You get more damage from Raging Blow, and you can instantly reset its cooldown, so you always have something to press. Throffing Berserker might be okay with Onslaught if you wanted to, like, because that means you can kind of stack rampages really quickly. I don't think Seethe is too good, but yeah, overall, I would go. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong line. Cruelty, yeah, 100%. Cruelty, go Cruelty, really strong. Syncs nicely with your Battle Trance as well if you're running that. The next is Bladestorm. I run Bladestorm on this because, firstly, you get Rage, and it does a lot of damage. So it does about 14k over 3.5 seconds, so it's a less time. But also, when you get these haste buffs, right, and you'll see that in a sec, once we get haste stacking up here, your Bladestorm's like really quick. It only lasts a couple seconds. And then you have a whole bunch of rage to dump out of that, and you've just done a whole bunch of damage too. So it's a really nice burst cooldown, in my opinion. Definitely worth taking. And Dragon's Roar is a nice crit. I don't really think this is better than Bladestorm just because of the utility you still get from Bladestorm. I've been really experimenting with Reckless Abandon, and Siegebreaker I think is good too. In my opinion, I think Reckless Abandon works really nicely with Slaughterhouse and gives you some huge burst windows every minute and a half. And it essentially means that you'll always be able to put Slaughterhouse up to the 8 stacks while you're bursting, which is really good. Some people might say that's a bit overkill, right? So Siegebreaker is more similar to something like Colossal Smash. So every 30 seconds instead of 45, and obviously does less damage, you do 15% more damage. It really depends on the playstyle that you think is better. In my opinion, Fury has a lot of passive damage anyway, and having that huge burst with this 40% MS is what really creates massive pressure. And you get a whole bunch of benefits when you go Reckless Abandon. So the first one is, if we look at Raging Blow, it does about 3k damage, generates 12 rage, and then Bloodthirst, which does 2.7k damage. When you Recklessness, you get to, that does firstly way more damage, 4.5k, but it also has a charge on it. So charges, and then Bloodbath, which generates 16 rage. So firstly, they double, right? So you get double because of the rage generation change from going Recklessness, but you also do considerably more damage in both of them. So that syncs quite nicely in my opinion. And you know, when you combine that extra damage with the crit, very, very strong. It means essentially every single button you're pressing is significantly chunking a target. It may be the case that in the future Siegebreaker is better. So PvP talents, Battle Trance, pretty straightforward. I really like Battle Trance when you're in Arena because you're getting passive rage and you're getting 3% of your health. you hit this twice and then you're sort of chilling, especially if you're targeting one, like a single target. A lot of the times though, I would swap this talent out with something like Disarm, Master and Commander, maybe even Blood Rage if you're going to get slowed a lot. And the new Demolition's pretty good too, which I haven't really experimented too much with, or even Death Sentence. So Barbarian's quite good too in certain instances. So ultimately, this is pretty flexible. I'd say baseline, go Battle Trance, and then swap it out to something more situational. In terms of Enduring Rage is really, really core for what you're doing because you can get your Enrage effect from your Bloodthirst and then extend it with Raging Blow, which means essentially you always have Enrage up if it gets procced early. So we proc it here, and then if you can see, every time I hit, what's it called, Raging Blows, I get another proc of it, and then it means that like all your buttons are essentially extending this Enrage out. Enrage never drops off, and you have like 100% uptime of it, which in my opinion, really, really strong, super underutilized, and like undervalued for a lot of people who don't understand how important Enrage is for what you're trying to do on Fury. Really buffs your damage considerably. And the last one, which I think is absolutely mandatory unless you're versing double DPS, Rogue Mage, stuff like that, is Slaughterhouse. So Slaughterhouse is the new talent, which means that Rampage has a Mortal Strike. It gets stacked up to 40%. And there's a couple of things you really need to think about when you're doing Slaughterhouse. The first thing is it is a stacking debuff. So if I apply it now, I put 4 stacks on my first Rampage, but now I have a really big impetus to try and get to the 8th stack. So I hit it again, and now I'm on 8 stacks, right? And even though right now I have the Rage to Rampage, if I'm like a bit dicey on it, you can kind of extend it out. You can kind of wait to the last second to reapply Rampage again, so that you can always keep this 8 stacks of Mortal Strike. What you'll find is if you press Rampage instantly every time, instead of kind of giving it a bit of buffer, depending on what buttons you have left and how much rage, it's really, really hard to keep. It can be difficult to keep Slaughterhouse up, which is where like Onslaught's actually pretty good because Onslaught gives you instantly 20 rage, and then when you condemn, you get 20 rage as well. So you can kind of keep this Slaughterhouse debuff up way more consistently, which is one of the biggest selling points of Fury right now, this 40% debuff, right? And as you can see, pretty much with the right timing and just making sure that you're not applying it too early if you don't have other buttons to press, you can kind of keep the 8 stacks of Rampage up, or sorry, whatever this debuff's called, Slaughterhouse up, really, really consistently. I'm not, pressing any buttons. This is just one way that you can do it more and more. So in terms of rotation, obviously, so these are baseline. Rotation is interesting. In my opinion, I don't know. I'm not a Fury PvE expert, so please, if there's better rotations, it might be, advised to take their advice. But how I've been finding a lot of success is to essentially charge, Bloodthirst straight away, hit my 2 Raging Blows or Condemn, essentially, get my Rampage up, and then rinse, repeat. Pretty much keep these things on cooldown. I think it's always better to press the Condemn instead of the Raging Blows if it's off cooldown and you can use it, because it generates 8 more rage. The other thing is just to press Onslaught whenever it's up to generate more rage, and essentially press Rampage when you need to avoid getting capped. Really, really straightforward rotation. Probably the only element of difficulty is coming from Whirlwind. So Whirlwind means that your next 2 hits will hit the other target, and as you can see, really, really powerful with Rampage, because now you can keep it up on 2 targets or multiple. But as you saw then, I didn't hit my Whirlwind before I reapplied that last stack, so now we're going to let this drop off. You Whirlwind, you put Rampage up, and you can kind of stack really quickly up to the 8 again. You Whirlwind, and then you can keep 8 on all of the team, hypothetically. But it's just a matter of a bit of micro to make sure that you're always pressing Whirlwind before the big abilities, having some discipline, making sure that you're applying it, and getting the hang of that instead of sweeping strikes. Much more, I think the hard part is Fury has a lot of globals, like you're pressing a lot of buttons at a single time, and then having Whirlwind in between the GCDs could be the difference between this Slaughterhouse falling off on your primary target. in which case you don't want to press whirlwind if that's what happens. In terms of burst, what I like to do personally is, I like to start off with getting up your battle trance. I like to get enrage going. And then what I would like to do first is to get 8 stacks of Slaughterhouse. So I've got some obvious pressure there. And then I like to pop off with the Reckless Abandon here. So huge damage, essentially pressing Rampage off cooldown and then pressing whatever other buttons I get. And as you can see, really, really big damage there. And with the Conduit that you can get, you'll essentially all have a much longer Recklessness. Recklessness lasts for me for 15.5 seconds, extended by about 12 seconds, and then with more PvP talents and all that kind of good stuff, you're going to be doing really well. The alternative sort of burst combo that you can do a lot of the times is you can Bladestorm into Recklessness. The big issue with Bladestorm is just, as you can see there, I let the Slaughterhouse fall off, which means that it is quite difficult to get that back up sometimes. But obviously, if you have 100% uptime, you are going to crank a target, and the damage is very, very strong, especially with Euphoria. Personally, right now, I've really been enjoying Fury. I think it might be even better with Fatal Flaw, so lining this up with your Recklessness could be really, really strong, especially since the cooldown of Recklessness aligns pretty closely with the cooldown of your Euphoria. So by the time you have the second Recklessness, Euphoria or Thrill Seeker should be procced, which makes it really good. And then it lasts 15 seconds. Euphoria lasts 10 seconds, so you get that second 20% extra versatility on the second half, or you can get the full experience of it once you are capped out. And you can see that sort of here. I'll just hit this straight away and we'll just watch the Thrill Seeker stack sort of build up as we're in combat. By the time this Recklessness hopefully drops off, we will be, by the time Thrill Seeker procs, we should have Recklessness back up and ready to go. So, what are my overall thoughts on Fury? I think it is very, very strong. It is looking very, very powerful, and we're going to look over that in some overall damage. In some damage sort of matchups, we're going to verse some healers and just show you how powerful the new MS effect actually is. Do I think it is going to be overpowered? I think it might be overpowered in a similar way that Windwalkers were considered overpowered early in the season. It'll do a huge amount of damage, but it still doesn't really have too much of a defensive. It has Enrage Regen, which is okay. It heals a lot of health, and it lasts quite a while, especially you can use it while you're stunned too. But not having D-stands makes it really, really difficult to sort of stay competitive against a lot of stuff. And we're just about to see this proc in a sec as well. I'm just taking note of that now. So as you can see, the Euphoria proc is about to happen. It's at 36 now, which means that Euphoria should proc now, right? We have Euphoria for 10 seconds. And actually, now that I look at it, the big thing that'll happen is this Euphoria will end. And then if you look at the last Kappa talent on Nadja, which is Fatal Flaw, by the time that Euphoria ends, if you've hit Recklessness straight away at the start of combat, you'll get this extra 20% versatility. So on your second Recklessness go, you're going to do insane amounts of damage. So it really does favor opening really hard. In terms of comps, I think Warrior, this will do really well in Cleaves. I don't know if it'll do too well in setup comps. I think stuff like SP Warrior would still be really good. A lot of Arms Warrior comps where the Warrior is kind of just purely doing damage rather than focusing too much on utility, it's going to do well in. I think a lot of the times you can switch them out, and Fury might be the better cleave option, largely because of how strong the Mortal Strike effect is. It's 15% stronger than Mortal Strike at the moment. In terms of Conduits, I like Depths of Insanity. I think that 30% extra Recklessness really makes a huge difference. The other option is something like Vicious Contempt or using like your own Covenant's ability. I've picked the Hack and Slash, so Rampage has a 22% chance to refund a charge of Raging Blow, essentially so you always have a button to press. And then I do think going down the Naja line is really good. I haven't really tested the Night Phase stuff too much as well. And the other thing is the Vicious Contempt. I don't think this is too interesting. And then Merciless Bone Grinder, which I also don't think is super interesting either. So in terms of legendaries, I've been playing around with this Signet of Tormented Kings, which is what is going to be on all the videos. I don't know if this is actually very good. It's fun for sure. And I think if you kind of proc it and you get the Blade Storm, it does a whole bunch of early damage. And then the issue is that you're going to want to be pressing globals instead of getting Blade Stormed. So there's a couple of new legendaries that I would recommend. Firstly, I think you could probably run Sinful Surge, which would be quite good if you can get if you're proccing recklessness lower, so you can extend that rec out. Not going to be super useful outside of that. So if you're hitting them early and you're pushing someone down to 35%, this can essentially mean that you're constantly extending it. So every 5.5 seconds, you're getting an extra 2 seconds on recklessness. I don't think that's too crazy. I think the other thing that could be quite good is stuff like Deathmaker. Deathmaker will apply Siegebreaker to your target for 6 seconds, which is very, very strong when you're bursting down a target. I'm really leaning towards Deathmaker in my opinion. I think this is going to just have high burst in those windows, which is what you're really looking for in Fury. Cadence of Fujita is just base stat boost, so 5% extra haste pretty much all the time. Generally pretty strong, nothing too crazy. You also have stuff like Will the Berserker, which I don't really think is too interesting. 7% crit's not bad, but then, it's outside of your window. And then Reckless Defense, so essentially you can drop the cooldown of your Recklessness and Enrage regen by 1 second, which could be good to throw people off if they're playing around your ER, but nothing too interesting. I think some base stuff like Misshapen Mirror will still be useful. Signet is obviously fun to play with, and stuff like Sifus is going to be good too. Outside of that, I would say, look at your own Covenant's legendaries and see how well they do. I think if you're a Fury as Spirit Bastion, you should definitely, invest in that. Like, Spirit Bastion is really good. I would still do this if I was Fury. Just that 8 seconds of extra Spirit Bastion damage is sort of invaluable. So, in terms of other things, we're going to talk about the overall gearing. I have no honest idea on what gearing will look like in 9.1 for Fury. I would kind of follow what the PvE big stat is, which if it's crit, I wouldn't. I'd probably go haste first. Mastery is pretty good too because you essentially have enraged up the entire time. So I think from here, what we'll do is we'll jump into some clips of some gameplay of me doing some duels as Fury. Okay, guys, we're just gonna see. Just gonna be dueling my friend Geek Week on his paladin. He's not an insane paladin by any means, but I think it kind of represents the average healer and how they do. I'm not kicking, I'm not stunning. Essentially, just looking at purely the damage and the impact of Slaughterhouse in this duel. I don't think I was doing my rotation optimally as well. Haven't really played too much of Fury at this point, but we'll just skip through a little bit until it gets started. So I think, here we go. Around here, I start off with like a kind of a bit of a soft opener here. And then once we get our 8 stacks up, 4 stacks really, I'm pressing the Big Damn Recklessness. I actually didn't have my trinket bound to this either. And we're seeing the impact of this Slaughterhouse, right? Look how little that Divine Favor heals him with wings outside of Arena. So there's no dampening here. Really, really huge impact there. And as you can see, we're just slowly able to build up extra damage. And like I said before, we're not kicking. We're just seeing, how the damage feels, how everything goes. But this is essentially going with cooldowns. And we're using Signet here. I don't really think that's the best, use thing to use. I think there's much better legendaries to go for. So as you can sort of see, the pressure is pretty crazy because you can kind of keep that 80% up consistently. 40% damage debuff consistently. And as you can see, we're just going to jump out and look at what it's like as arms. So as arms, same thing. Nothing really changes in my opinion. And the pressure difference is pretty considerably different. As you guys know, as arms, you have Sharpen, which gives you essentially a few seconds of 50% MS. However, and as you can see, we let the MS drop. what happens is outside of that, you have a 25% MS. So the majority of the times you're hitting someone with the 25% MS and trying to, do as much as you can. And I think Arms is a lot more momentum based, whereas Fury can kind of make opportunities happen with the amount of damage it does and that permanently high amount of burst that you're doing. So as you can see, we get the sharpens out kind of low, not really like looking to optimally do it here. We were kind of playing a bit random, especially because we're not kicking. If we're kicking and then we're sharpening afterwards, it's obviously going to be more effective. But it's pretty clear here that just overall damage output is much, much higher on Fury, and just overall pressure, I think the burst. That's going to be really, really hard to get around. And while Arms has more defensive cooldowns and defensive stance, which is really important, it's still probably not crazy enough to overtake the amount of pressure that Fury puts out right now. So overall, as you can see, not really much happens out of this. And this will be the experience that most of you guys have when you're dueling a healer outside of arena, because there's no dampening. It's sort of like healers outside of arena are balanced around not dying because they should be too strong at that. So now what we're doing is we're getting back onto the Fury, and this time we're looking at Fury without using the, what's it called, Slaughterhouse debuff. And the reason why we're doing that is I want to show you guys how much it impacts how the pressure feels. So the biggest issue in my opinion with Fury is that, or previously without the MS, has been that you have this distinct ability like you see now to drop someone pretty low, but it's very hard to keep them there because you don't have a Mortal Strike effect. So once his burst runs out, like I could kick this, but he's not even putting Divine Favor up to heal through this. He's just able to heal hard cast with Holy Lights, which he wasn't able to do in the last duel. So overall, I think pretty strong in terms of the Slaughterhouse effect, which is ultimately what's going to make Fury viable for next season. Hopefully, it's not nerfed to oblivion because it'd be kind of cool to see Fury be strong again. The interesting thing is I don't think Fury has too much in the way of self-healing. Like, it's healing a little bit, but it's not like other seasons, specifically season 1, where Fury healing was absolutely bonkers. And, overall, even when we do get him low, as you can see here, we're pumping out as much damage as possible, and that Holy Light still heals for like 15k. So the lack of Mortal Strike, really big impact, does not feel right. And when we jump back into the second clip, once we put it back on, so last one against the healer, you can sort of see what happens here. So we get everything set up, we dump some rage in a sec with Bladestorm. I dump all that rage, and the reason why you want to dump your rage before you press Rampage, Recklessness, is that you get 50 rage with the buff. So as you can see, the damage seems really high, just consistently. Feels like a pretty much different game as we go through here, and we're able to sort of keep chaining it so that we're extending this Rampage sort of at the last possible second sometimes, where I don't feel like I have the rage to put it up. I would use the Slaughterhouse, whatever it's called, that gives you the 20 rage when you have Enrage, because that's going to be a consistent way to make sure you have the Mortal Strike on people. I think the biggest difference with the Fury Mortal Strike is that it's very inconsistent compared to the Arms one. Like the Arms one, you have it up and it's very easy to keep it up. I think as the season goes longer, people will get a lot better at kiting or like leaping as this 8 goes to its last few seconds. It can kind of track your rage and know when you're going to Rampage again, and then try and reset it back to 4. But as you saw, that was a Divine Favor heal, which Divine Favor got nerfed too, but Divine Favor heal with wings, and it only healed for like 8k. So really huge impact on a lot of those heals there. So as you can see, we're still doing good damage, but outside of our Rampage window, we're not like going to finish him off necessarily, which makes sense because we don't have dampening on our side and there's wings and his cooldown's up. But we're still able to kind of get this pressure without that and do quite well. And as you can see, what's about to happen is, we've been kind of prepping everything. I get the Bladestorm here, so I get a little bit of burst damage coming in. And then when we smash this Recklessness here, this is going to be game over. We're just going to do way too much damage, even with the Divine Favor and the Save by the Light shield from the Paladin. Not really going to be too much that you can get through. Just insane amounts of damn that finishes him off. So now we're going to look at some duels, like against a Windwalker. So primarily, like I feel like Windwalker Warrior, like unless you kind of kill the Windwalker really quickly, it's pretty difficult. But as you can sort of see here, this is one where he's not using too many cooldowns as well. This Rampage just cuts through everything so quickly. When you see the Fist, you're still able to have so many seconds of Recklessness as well, and we just break through the entire Karma here too, and it's just like intense amounts of damage. And once you hit those rampages, they just do too much damn too. So we like jump across to another one where we have no cooldowns, and we're just essentially trying to kite this first roll, get a stun when he rolls in, so he doesn't have any mobility, and then even just your base damage is doing so much. The Duelling comes out, and you can kind of kite it. You're not super weak. You are able to get the right stuff, and to be honest, you hit him with one rampage and it gets people so low, you pair it up with a condemn and you can kind of finish it off, which I don't think many arms warriors are going to be living in that situation. Finally, we look at the, like one of the biggest tests is to look how much does sort of karma go through. So we can look at how well, how quickly we can get through karma and kind of finish off a leather target. Which I feel like arms warriors can do pretty easily with Colossal Smash. So once we get 100 rage, we're going to test this here. So we start out with just putting everything on. We Bladestorm it, and then we get huge damage. We break through this Karma really quickly, and then you can kind of see how quickly this damage is going and just popping off right now. And ultimately, there's not too much you can do. That's 6k hits. You're hitting 2k per rampage. Absolutely bonkers. So I hope you guys are really interested in playing Fury in 9.1. I think it's going to be an excellent spec as the way it is right now. And, we'll have much more content on it soon as I learn more about it, because Fury is still something really new to me. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, following any of the relevant Twitch, Discord links below.